Another big biotech deal on Wall Street today, with Pfizer announcing its nearly $11 billion acquisition of Array BioPharma. Shares of Array surging 57% as a result. Now, so far, it's been a pretty big year for biotech M&A, including Bristol Myers' $74 billion acquisition of Celgene and Eli Lilly's $8 billion purchase of Loxo Oncology. So as the deal space heats up, which name should investors look to as the next takeout target? Peter.
You know, it's tough to name what the next takeout target might be, but I think the reality is, what did Pfizer do here? Pfizer actually already had a pipeline, and now they've added to it. They didn't jump into the $70+ billion deals, $50 billion deals, $11 billion. They have the cash. They're willing to have a little bit on debt. I like what they're doing here, and this is why I continue to hold this stock. I think this builds into that whole thing. They've got 15 different blockbuster drugs right now in the pipeline. This can add to that because of the fact of what Array brings them is more in cancer and colorectal. All of that is going to be huge for them. And I just think that this makes total sense right now for Pfizer. A lot of guys were bashing this today, saying, why do they need to buy into their pipeline in the area? I think that's the right thing to do right now. And I think this is a CEO who's relatively new on the job, but been there 25 years, who's doing exactly the right thing. There are names that have hit recently. You know, I was just talking about with one of the producers, FOLD. There are names out there where I think in the biotech world that makes some sense for somebody maybe along the line. The problem is, it seems to me that everybody wants to make the big deals. So I think there are smaller names out there, this being one of them, where I think there's a better opportunity with a smaller name like this that could be a big deal for Pfizer in the future.
Well, our next guest is no stranger to the biotech space. As former FDA commissioner, he oversaw a record number of drug approvals, helping to combat everything from the opioid crisis to the rise of e-cigarettes. He just rejoined his post at venture capital firm New Enterprise Association, which specializes in healthcare and technology investments, where he worked before becoming FDA commissioner. CNBC contributor Scott Gottlieb joins us now from Washington, D.C. Dr. Gottlieb, great to have you with us. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So in your capacity now, back at your old job, I'm wondering how you look at the landscape and how you interpret what's going on in terms of the M&A wave, particularly the focus on cancer, and how you translate that into what you guys are investing in.
Well, look, in oncology, we're seeing a real renaissance in our understanding of the biology of cancer, and that's leading to regulatory changes and policy changes that's creating a much more efficient route to market for many of these compounds. You're seeing really dramatic results in early-stage clinical trials with these cancer compounds because you're able to select populations of patients that are so exquisitely targeted with the drugs that are being put into development, because we're targeting the underlying mechanisms that are now driving disease. And that's attracting additional investment into this space, and that's ultimately good for patients. Of the 59 compounds that were approved last year by the FDA in 2018, novel compounds, 19 were in cancer, and there were 38 supplemental approvals in oncology. So this really is a renaissance time for discovery and development in oncology.
What were the major changes in regulation that enabled this to happen, that sort of facilitated these clinical trials, facilitated the path to approval?
Well, I think the changes in regulation really followed the science. And so you see things like tissue-agnostic approvals, which we codified in guidance while I was at the agency, allowing sponsors to get approval for indications based not just on where the tumor arose in the body, but the particular molecular drivers of the tumor. So you could actually get an approval based on the genomics of how the drug worked. Things like basket trials, which allowed sponsors to study drug effects in multiple tumor types, all in the context of the same clinical trial. And if you could show a response across multiple tumors in different organ systems, you can get an approval across all those different disease states. Previously, we had looked at oncology based on where the tumor arose. But because the drugs themselves are targeting the underlying basis of the disease, now the FDA is looking at approving drugs based on those molecular targets, and not just on where tumors arise in the body, recognizing that the disease is sometimes the same regardless of where the tumor is arising.
On the venture level, where's a lot of the money going outside of oncology? What's sort of the next frontier?
Well, I think the next frontier that we really haven't cracked the biology of is the brain. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities in neurodegenerative diseases, psychiatric diseases, where we really are in the early innings of understanding the biology of the brain. We've effectively drugged all the major organ systems in the body, and we've understood the biology of how those drugs work and how those organ systems can go awry to create disease. We don't have that in understanding when it comes to neurodegenerative diseases. So I think that's a huge unmet medical need and a huge investment opportunity.
I want to take a hard right turn, if we can, Dr. Gottlieb, and talk about alt meats. With Beyond Meat hitting the market, there's been such an interest in these alternative meat products out there. Do you think the FDA should take any sort of, is this in the purview of the FDA at all to make sure that it's safe?
Well, absolutely. The plant-based meat products are squarely in the purview of the FDA. And Impossible Foods took an interesting regulatory strategy, getting their heme additive to the soy product that constitutes their burgers approved as a color additive. So it was a very novel regulatory path through the agency. Where there's more regulatory uncertainties when it comes to cultured meat that's being developed through culturing processes that mirror biotechnology processes as sort of substitutes for slaughtered meat. This is another significant opportunity. You have companies like Finless Fish and many other companies, Memphis Meats, getting into this space, and the costs are coming down to the point where these are going to be competitive products. We were figuring when I was at the agency that this would constitute a significant portion of the market going forward, or eventually as the costs continue to come down. The fish products fall squarely within FDA's purview, but when it comes to meat and poultry, beef and poultry, there is some ongoing questions between USDA and FDA about which agency has jurisdiction over which parts of that culturing process, of that manufacturing process. We settled a lot of it when I was at the agency, but there are some lingering questions going forward about where those regulatory lines will get drawn. I
mean, the term cultured meat kind of gives me the chills, but I want to take another turn and ask you about CBD, and that's a topic that we have talked about a lot, but we're seeing more and more products hit the shelves at mainstream retail locations like Walgreens, et cetera. What's your take on CBD and how much more regulation there needs to be here?
Well, there's going to be more regulation of CBD. There has to be. CBD is not a benign compound. There are side effects associated with taking too much CBD. There might be a cumulative effect. You know, if you're having CBD products in your food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you're probably getting a pretty high dose of CBD. I think Congress had an expectation that CBD, at least derived from hemp, would find a legal path to the marketplace. So FDA needs to figure that out, what the regulatory path is going to be. They recently had a workshop. I think one thing that the agency could do is put the onus back on the CBD manufacturers to come in and file petitions with the agency demonstrating that this substance can be safely put in food. The challenge right now, the political challenge, is that CBD derived from hemp itself as a crop can grow in a lot of soil that isn't very rich. And so you see a lot of states like New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts, states that traditionally don't have big agricultural industries, seeing this as a real opportunity to grow out their agricultural base. And so it has a lot of political support, and CBD itself is a derivative of hemp, is a high value derivative. And so everyone wants to find ways to put CBD into the food supply and create that new marketplace, but it needs to be done safely.
You've called it snake oil to me. You still
well,
stick by
look,
that?
I think the science, the uses of CBD have gotten well ahead of the science. There is an approved compound, Epidiolex, by GW Pharma that has shown efficacy in pediatric seizure disorders. And there'll be other demonstrated uses of purified and high-dose forms of CBD. I'm quite certain of it. But the idea that you can put it in dog food and it's going to calm your dog as you go away to work during the day, or help them get through a lightning storm, I think that's pretty hokey. And there's certainly no science to support that. And so I think the uses of CBD and what people are trying to do with it have gotten well ahead of where the science is.
Dr. Gottlieb, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Scott Gottlieb, former FDA Commissioner and CNBC contributor. Guy Adami, we covered a lot of ground.
A lot of ground. Oh, my God. I mean,
Yeah.
First of all, I think that's the first time he's on the show, number one. Great interview. Number two, if you're asking me in the stock world, I go to 3 places. Biogen is too cheap. I understand they missed on Alzheimer's, but you know what? Everybody's missing. Biogen too cheap here. Bluebird Bio, if you remember 2 years ago, that was everybody's favorite pick. That stock has come off, but you know what? That's in the crosshairs now, and I'll tell you what, Sarepta now is the absolute crosshairs for somebody to buy them, so those are my 3.